Okay, so we are going to round it out. So that's a challenge after this week. Ups and downs for everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit about the midterms, but I want to end things with hope tonight and a little bit of the energy that I think we need. So it's now clear that the 2022 midterm elections did not turn out the way the American right thought they would, including myself. But they didn't reveal much that we did not already know. We continue to see a deepening divide throughout our nation. The views of roughly half the population of America are increasingly suppressed and delegitimized by most major institutions and media outlets. This difference in opinion is not a mere matter of policy preferences. Americans are divided about what men and women, the family, citizenship, and nation states are and ought to be, as well as when human life begins and ends. That's just the reality of the situation we find ourselves in. Few want to admit the reality of that situation, which is painful, but Americans are now divided over the building blocks and purpose of human civilization. Many do not consider what underlies all the factionalism we see amidst the noise, but that doesn't change the sordid reality. Nearly every major institution in America, be they commercial, cultural, political, or educational, is in the grip of a totalizing ethical system of thought, a way of life, that is fundamentally at odds with our own. In 2020, they all bowed down to it publicly, accelerating change for the worse. And although a more robust federalism, combined with what I am here to suggest to you tonight, may buy us time, there's no possibility, in my opinion, of ultimately reconciling this fundamental opposition unless one side or the other wins. Now, in a very different America, the American right set out to conserve American institutions and an American way of life through political action and advocacy. The culture war was always real, but for good or ill, for the most part, it was thought to be fought within explicitly political spaces via explicitly political means. Business and the economy were considered neutral spaces, subject to discipline from shareholders and market demand. Today, however, the simple fact, the brutal reality of the matter is that few elite professions or corporations allow their members to safely dissent from woke dogma. Everyone knows that they risk their job and career if they do so publicly. The woke agenda, in other words, has been grafted into most major corporations. And since culture is made in large part by corporations, mainstream media and culture have largely turned into tools to support one side of the divide. In short, the American cultural and political landscape has been bulldozed and fundamentally reshaped over the last century. A one-party oligarchy tied to the radical ideology of identity politics rigidly controls our major institutions as populist resistance struggles but rises to meet it. Digital technology continues to reshape human perception, human behavior, and the very structure of human communities and institutions, causing an escalating war over its control. And the nature of this conflict is purposely obscured by many of its participants, and the rest of our leadership class is often too blind or too frightened to describe it. It's not only hard to come to grips with the depth of our division, it's difficult for those formed in a very different and healthier America to see it. The gap between the experience of older and younger generations of Americans has created a dangerously disparate visions of the reality in which we're all operating. But I think for everyone here, and increasingly for everyone else, people on both sides of the deepening divide are aware that what's at stake is what the American way of life is and ought to be in the 21st century. After this week, it's a good time to remind ourselves of this. Elections, while they're important, essential, are not ultimately going to save us. And I don't mean to disparage either man, nor the vital importance of the statesmanship which we are now desperately in need of. But on their own, neither Donald Trump nor Ron DeSantis are going to save you either. We citizens, dedicated to truth, goodness, and beauty, to the best of what Western civilization in America was and must now be reshaped to become again, we citizens must act. And this action must involve more than voting and giving money to whichever politician we think will fight to win. As some of you may have noticed in your lives, and you may have noticed this week, this strategy is sadly not always an effective one. But as so many people are asking, and as I suppose a lot of us are here together this week to discuss, what is to be done? And I would submit that the answer lies in a model provided by the college on the grounds of which we are gathered here tonight. Straightforward answer is that we will not retake America and its co-opted institutions unless we band together to form and reform new ones. When it comes to saving higher education, the only strategy that ultimately worked over the last 2 decades was the one that Hillsdale College chose. The others had their upsides, that worked in some ways, but ultimately, utterly rejecting the totalizing system of the rest of academia and focusing on forming a new one is what worked. Consider that 2 decades ago, and I remember this, it was laughable to many that an institution outside the mainstream could do what Hillsdale College has accomplished during that period of time. Many would have scoffed at the idea that an institution of higher learning could reject the standards, principles, best practices, and purposes of the rest of higher education on the basis of its own standards, principles, and purposes. I've heard many sentiments like this over the years when it came to reforming educational institutions. Something like, it's not just realistic. It's just not realistic. It's difficult. It's an uphill battle. Elite schools are hard to beat. They've credentialed American leaders for centuries. And besides, it'll take a long time. But during that time, Hillsdale, and I can say this because I'm not on the payroll here, has instead become one of the greatest examples we have in America of a successful new elite institution. Elite institutions, yes. Look, elite institutions set the benchmarks for the rest of society. They curate and credential people and ideas. They curate and credential people and ideas. And by curating and credentialing ideas, students, and teachers for a new generation of leaders, Hillsdale has become the elite institution it is for all of red state America. Why? Because the college boldly planted the flag, talented and purpose-driven people have rallied around it. Because the college has a strong understanding of its mission, it has been able to wield considerable influence, fostering true education throughout the nation. I submit to you tonight, this is the same model we need to apply to the economy and commerce and media and culture. This is why I moved from California to Texas. Why would anyone do that? Almost 2 years ago to start Refounding. So, I come bring good news from the front lines along with a catch. The good news is that a momentous cultural commercial shift is now underway across this country that I believe will become the most significant change in America in living memory. But only if talented people with the right resources continue to work together to foster it. Whether or not we succeed or fail, and we must not fail, the geographic, digital, and financial movement of millions of people and billions of dollars out from under the control of woke states, woke digital technology, and woke corporations and capital has already begun. And it's now the duty of all those who wish to stop the decline of our nation to join it. And, I don't know what that sounds like to you, but I'm telling you tonight, I know what I'm talking about is happening because I live and see it every day. In some ways, all of us do. Consider, Americans have already begun to act. Everyone knows that domestic migration from blue states to red states has rapidly accelerated over the last 2 years. But no one is allowed to say in public why exactly this is so. The answer is not merely lower taxes, as the Wall Street Journal sometimes tells me, nor was it a temporary move to avoid contracting COVID-19, as many on the left have pretended. The truth is that while all the causal factors of the last decade of migration from blue states to red remain in place, the last few years, more people than ever have been moving because of the tyrannical actions blue states took in reaction to the virus and the increase of crime and politically motivated violence, such as the 2020 riots, and the unwillingness of blue states to protect their own citizens. There's a general sense in America that things are falling apart and will likely get worse. In short, People are moving to seek a better way of life in a much deeper sense than the phrase is usually bandied about. Now, there's four major parts, if you look at good social science, or piece what you can from the runes of social science, around which human happiness typically revolves: religious observance, healthy family life, meaningful work, and community engagement. Now, in blue one-party counties, in blue one-party states, satisfaction in each of these areas is increasingly difficult for anyone dissenting from the woke cultural revolution to attain. The harsh truth is that it makes sense for many of those who live in such areas to move to red or purple states to seek a better way of life. And this is exactly what is happening all across this country. And this should give you hope, because this is what will enable a new commercial cultural movement that can save America. In America, the frontier is always with us. Yes, we have been told that people have been leaving New York and California for Florida and Texas for economic reasons for decades, but in the last few years, people have begun to purposely resettle in areas where they can live with those of like mind on fundamental issues. Florida and Texas are becoming more and not less strident politically. In both states, the clear result of the 2022 midterms proves without a doubt that the Republican Party is now far stronger there than it has been in the recent past. Again, I want to emphasize this point. Take something good out of this week. Despite all the worries about domestic migration, turning them blue, and hundreds of millions of dollars spent fruitlessly by the left, Texas and Florida just became markedly redder red states. This trend is going to continue as the differences between the way of life on offer in red and blue states become starker. Florida under Governor Ron DeSantis is the model of the future for red states, just as Gavin Newsom's California is the model for the blues. What I call the red state mindset is the realization that states can determine their own destiny. For instance, if red state Republicans had a clearer vision of what education should be and truly wanted to stop these institutions who are teaching the very things that are destroying our country, they would do something about it. Don't tell me how woke our state schools are. Change out their boards and leadership and threaten their funding. Fight to win. If and when they do so, good things will happen. And we see everything moving in that direction. That's the good news. The bolder red state policies, laws, and actions the Republican base is increasingly demanding make such actions more likely, and as they do so, it's less and less likely that those who disagree will relocate there. Okay, that's what I take on the political scene. Let's switch to the topic of the evening. The same forces driving geographic migration apply with even more force to the one-party-controlled workplace, marketplace, and digital world we all now live within. Here, too, some have already started moving in a promising direction. The quietly right-leaning or just plain non-woke dissenters in elite ranks suffering under this rolling cultural revolution are not alone. There are cutting-edge leaders in American business who have begun to stand up and speak out, and some of them put to shame many of those in similar positions who call themselves Republicans. Take a few examples. Important to highlight these examples. Good things happening. The wealthiest man in the world, Elon Musk, recently declared, quote, "Unless it is stopped, the woke mind virus will destroy civilization and humanity will never reach Mars." And you call me a radical. His high-profile effort to buy Twitter for the sake of allowing dissent on the platform, I think, could be adequately described as an act of statesmanship for the 21st century. Musk has called ESG, the socially conscious investing acronym used by woke capital to dictate the politics of business entities, quote, an outrageous scam. His position echoes the long-standing criticism of modern America made by Peter Thiel, who's one of the most interesting entrepreneurs and investors in America, that we are losing our ability to innovate. Now, Thiel recently set forth what he called, I could wish some congressional Republicans did this. Thiel recently set forth what he called an enemies list, denigrating some of the largest figures in American finance and all those beholden to woke capital who stand in opposition to cryptocurrency. He labeled ESG the enemy of Bitcoin. And perhaps the most belligerent public statement he's ever made. He called ESG and all that surrounds it a hate factory, equivalent to the Communist Chinese Party. And he urged a revolutionary youth movement dedicated to crypto to rise and take over the world.